On the reservation, well, I later on in the show, I'm going to explain to you something that happened on the reservation at the beginning of the reservations all over America and into Canada, um, in which we lost a lot of our traditional way. So, what you see today when people say this is the Indian way or this is the red way, this is not true. Okay? This is absolutely not true. And one big thing I want to say is red does not represent Indians. Okay? Red does not represent Indians. It's just a color that represents life because blood is red. And the only red Indian I've ever seen is one who's sunburned. Okay? Or they threw red paint on him or something, but we're brown. We are not red. We never were red. In fact, if you look at the really old photos that were taken, from Sitting Bull's time, you look at them. They look almost black. It's because they were outside all day. But they were not red. Okay? Do you know where that term comes from? Red Indians. Do you know where that comes from? That comes from Christopher Columbus. When he landed in Central South America, and the Indians there, he first, well, of course, we all know that he was trying to find India by going a different route. So when he landed in that area, I think they call it Hispaniola or something like that. He thought at first he was in India. Then he realized, hey, wait a minute, these guys are different looking. So, he called them Red Indians. After that, he called them Red Indians, but we never called ourselves that. Now, some of the Lakota racists, they'll say that, well, it's in the Sundance songs. But you know what? The Sundance songs, if it has the word Oyate Luta, which means Red Nation, if a Sundance song has those words, that Sundance song is not old. That means it was written within the past 100 years, probably in the 1950s. Okay? It was probably written in the 1950s. So it's not an ancient song. If a Sundance song said, or any ceremonial song that has the words Oyate Luta in it, that's not an ancient song. That means that song was written probably in the 1950s, but it's not ancient. Okay? And so I really want to point that out right away that red does not represent Indians. I meet so many people who think that because that's what they've been taught by the media, which includes books and movies, and most of that is nonsense. Okay? Now, the reason why is because of what happened on the reservation, in which, we went through two experiences. One involves the boarding schools, and the other one involves the churches, and they work together. So what happened was we were deprived and denied the things that we need. Yeah, for example, our language was made illegal, our ceremonies were made illegal, and we could not hunt for the foods that our bodies were used to. So this means we were hit physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Okay? Now, in the Lakota way, the self is seen as having four parts: the mind, the body, the heart, and the soul, with the heart meaning emotion. That's the four parts of the self. But what in the beginning of the reservation, we were hitting three of those parts. We were attacked in 3 of the 4 parts of the self. Like I said, we were hit physically, emotionally, and spiritually. That means only one part left, and that is the mind. So, since we were hit in those 3 parts, we became weak minded. Yeah? We were beaten physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So, we became weak minded. This is the same process that cults use when they recruit new members. It's the same process that terrorists use. It's the same process that missionaries use. You deny the person something and only focus on one part of the self, eventually you'll be able to control him. That's brainwashing. Now, America does not want to admit this happened. So you don't hear about it. You don't know about it. And when you do learn about it, you think, oh, that's just a radical guy. He's just, being radical. And you don't realize that it's really the truth. Yeah, it's really the truth. But America does not want the world to know about it. So this is the reason why most people in the world have no idea that this happened. It's not in history books. Yeah, it's not in any Native American books because most Native Americans are brainwashed. They're Christian or they look at their culture from a Christian perspective. Either way, it's off target. Okay? So this is why I don't recommend any books. Just 6 books I recommend, and these 6 books were written a long time ago. Yeah, they nothing within the past 10 years. All right, the Walker Collection, which is 5 books, and mine. Those are the only ones I recommend, and most of you probably haven't even heard of them because the government does not want you to know about them. Those books contain the truth. Okay? So, anything by Joseph P. Marshall is dualistic. It's Christian influence. That's not a reliable source. And I have gone through his books, and I see the dualism everywhere. Dualism is something that's not part of our culture. This experience that happened, how we became brainwashed, this is how we became dualistic. And I'm going to explain this in more detail later, okay? I'm just kind of giving you a little taste of it, okay? This experience that I just described here of what happened to our great grandparents in the beginning of the reservation time. Um, they wanted to be Christian. They cut their hair short. They started wearing farmer clothes and living in log cabins and such. Yeah, and um, they wanted the children to every parent wants their children to have a good life. So they felt that the only way to have a good life was to become a Christian. So these children were sent to church schools, boarding schools, and basically had the Indian beaten out of them. So when those children grow up, they don't know anything from the culture. And what little they know is only what the priest allowed. And that information is Christianized. Yeah. For example, the white buffalo calf story, the white buffalo calf pipe story is most people know the story, but it's a very short story. But there's parts of the story that the church did not want people to know because it conflicts with the Bible. Yeah, there's parts of the story that conflict with the Bible. So the priest that they left that out. So as a result, most Lakota people today, if you ask them what that story is, they're going to give you a Christianized view, and they're going to make this woman seem just heavenly, like she's an angel. Yeah, but in the story, she commands the Lakota people to kill 4 Crow Indians, and from one, they're supposed to cut off his hair. They're supposed to scalp him. From the other 3, they're supposed to oh no, they're supposed to scalp 3 of them, and from one man, they're supposed to cut his ear off. And then they put the hair together, put it, make a hole in the ear, and attach that ear to the pipe. See, that doesn't sound too good, does it? Why is that there? There is a reason. Yeah, my students know the reason, and people who've taken my seminars, they know the reason too. But the churches don't want you to know the reason. See, churches believe in good versus evil. Our ancient way says that does not exist. It's man who creates good versus evil. So anything that does not fit the good versus evil concept, the churches try to do away with it from native culture. So this is why today most Lakota people, they don't know the complete versions of these stories. Okay? So we really went through a cultural change. Yeah? And in the 1960s and 70s, we started to want to be Indian again. We started growing our hair long again. But what we were striving to return to was kind of blurry. You know, we couldn't really see it. The reason why is because we're Christian influenced. We want to say Tunkashila Wakantanka, but we never said that. And our ancestors never said that. They said a different word. But Tunkashila Wakantanka is a Christian definition of God. And they say Atewa Kantanka to mean Jesus. Yeah, and we never said these things. So that's an example of how we changed. Okay, how things have changed. Now I know cultures evolve. That's a fact. I do know that, but that's fine. But it's a problem evolves from something pure to something dualistic, like it got infected. In this sense, it didn't evolve, it got infected. This is what happened to native spiritualities. They evolved from something pure and wholesome into something that's infected. And sadly, this is what most people are hanging on to. They're hanging on to an infected view of our culture and spirituality. They don't realize it because they're infected too. Yeah? What are they infected with? This thing called duality. Duality is when you take something and you split it into 2 parts. I like this part. So if you agree with me, you're my friend. If you don't agree with me, then you're the enemy and I must destroy you. See? They label things into good versus bad. They choose one side and say everything else is wrong and bad and evil. That's duality. In the ancient way, nature says there's at least 3 ways to look at something, at least, but never just 2. So duality is it only sees things in 2. So this means that they don't really see the full view of reality. This is why dualistic people are so close-minded. They'll say, "Oh, well, That's against the Bible, so that's bad. So don't associate with them. See, they keep away from each other. But in our ancient way, everything is a relative. You can learn from things, even difficulties. You can learn from that and turn it into a blessing. But in duality, it's not like that. In duality, a difficulty is seen as something bad, and that you are the are you blame somebody or you blame yourself for this bad thing, and then you tell your God to take it away. That's going into denial because you're being irresponsible. You're not learning from the difficulty, so you're being irresponsible. And the result is going to be it's going to keep repeating in your life. That same experience is going to continually be repeating itself. So in the matters of love, your relationships will continue to fail because you're always going to be choosing the wrong person. That's duality. In that example, that's codependency, but that's a part of duality too. It's another story, okay? But, excuse me, what I'm saying is that in the ancient way, you look at everything and you find value, yeah? Because difficulties are actually just time for you to stop and learn something. No matter how hard it hurts, no matter how angry it makes you feel, no matter how scared you are, you feel the emotion and do something constructive and healthy so the emotion leaves you. Then you can use your mind and start learning from it and making the best of the situation. And that's how you transform it into a blessing, because when you do that, it's going to give you knowledge and it's going to give you wisdom, and you will come to peace with it. Those are blessings. And you will see more of what the world really looks like, and you'll see it's really a beautiful place. That's the ancient way. The dualistic way is to say, oh, those are bad, those are evil, we must destroy them. I don't agree with them, so they're evil, so we destroy them. Then when you have a difficulty, you say, oh, this difficulty is bad, it's evil, so I'm never going to do it again. And the result is you didn't learn anything. When you don't learn from your difficulties, you get more close minded. Okay? That's what happens. So you see the two different perspectives here, two different viewpoints. Yeah? Okay. Well, today, most Indians are incredibly dualistic. And I just told you the reason why. Okay? So, now Indians today, when they say things, they say it like they expect everything to, they think that everything that comes out of their mouth is the Indian way, even though really it's just an opinion. It's not the Indian way. Okay, and um, and it shows division where you have relatives fighting each other about something. Okay, and this is duality. So uh, actually, it was last night. Last night on Facebook, I saw an article written by a cousin of mine. Oh, first of all, let me say one more thing. One more thing. I just remembered. Because reservations became very, very Christian especially in the 1940s and 50s and early 60s, they were incredibly Christian, very strong. Because of that, divorce was seen in a very bad way, very, very bad light. Yeah, if you got divorced, people were like, "Oh, stay away from them. They're tainted. They're not good anymore." Yeah, that's how it was on the res. So what made it even worse is if a divorced person marries a second time. In the Bible, in the New Testament, it says in Matthew, I think it's what, chapter 19 or chapter 5? I don't know. I don't know. But it's in there. It's in Matthew, and this is in the New Testament. Matthew, uh, it's in two places. It's in Matthew chapter 5, verse 32, and Matthew uh, 19, verse 9. Yeah. Cherie is listening here from France, and she just told me the verses. She's our Bible expert. No, I'm just kidding. No, I wrote these down, yeah, because this applies to me. Yeah, I'll tell you in a few seconds here. These two verses say that if a man or a woman puts divorces their spouse and then marries a second time, then everybody is living in adultery in this. Yeah, the man's and the person who married twice, they're living in sin, and the second wife is living, or second husband is living in sin, and any children born from a second marriage are evil. They're bastards. So only the children born from a first marriage are good children. That's what this is saying. Now I'll explain to you why I said this applies to me. This is the reason why I have this written down, because my mother's family was incredibly Christian. And when they found out, when she was going out with my father, who's from the Rosebud Sioux tribe, my mother's from Cheyenne River, when they found out that she was dating my father, they were really upset with her because she told them that he was divorced. Yeah, and that in his my dad's first marriage, he had some children, but now he's divorced and he's single, and they were in love. And my mother's parents were angry, extremely angry, and it's because of these Bible verses. They were really upset at my father for, um, wanting to marry their daughter, because if they got married, that would mean that puts their daughter to be living in sin. And if she had a child from my father, they didn't want to have anything to do with that child because, according to these verses, that child would be considered evil. That's what happened. So my mother, she's not a Christian, okay? My mother is more to the ancient way. So my mother said, that doesn't make sense to me, so I'm going to marry him because I love him. And she kind of wanted to rebel too, yeah, because she was in her, yeah, she just wanted to rebel. So her and my dad got married. He was a good man. Why else would she marry him? Yeah. So they got married, and after that, I was born 2 years later, and my grandparents from my mother's side were extremely pissed, and they didn't want to have anything to do with me. My grandmother, my mother's mother, she told my mother, "If your baby cries, you go get him." She said, "That means me. If David falls off is falls and hurts himself on the ground, you pick him up, Nobody else is going to pick him up, so you pick him up. That's what my grandmother said. My mother told this to me, yeah, later in life. And she said it's just unreal how they were towards her and me. So my mother's relatives saw my mother as a tainted woman. Yeah, because I forgot something. My that marriage didn't work out because my father started to to become an alcoholic, and my mother did not want to be a codependent wife. Yeah, so she left with me, and they got a divorce. So after that, see, now my mother is divorced, and she's seen as a tainted woman. So her relatives, her cousins, would really look down on her just because she was divorced and a single mother now, a single parent. Because you never saw that on the reservation in those days. Yeah. So, so somebody might ask, well, didn't that happen? And how was that in ancient times? Well, in ancient times, we had something called a tioshpe. And for example, this is the way it goes. Your mother and her sisters are all your mothers. They're equally important. Okay? The men from these women, meaning their husbands or boyfriends or whatever, those are all your fathers. And the children from all these women are your brothers and sisters. Okay? Your mother's brother is your uncle, and his wife, I mean, that's your aunt, and they're of course their children are your cousins. That's how that works on your mother's side. On your father's side, your father and his brothers are your other fathers, and their wives are your other mothers, and their children are your other brothers and sisters. Okay, and your father's sisters are your aunts, their husbands are your uncles, and their children are your other cousins. So you got a lot of moms and dads on both sides of the family, and they're all equally important. So if your mom and dad split up for whatever reason, because it happened, yeah, anciently there was no such thing as a formal marriage ceremony. All they said was something like when the couple was in love and maybe they want to live together, they would just one of them would ask the other, do you want to be together? And maybe the other one will say, huh, how watching? Yes, I want that. So they talk to their families and they say, we're in love and we want to live together now. So the families are like, yeah, okay, that's cool. So then they go before the council and they make this announcement so everybody knows, yeah, that this couple is together. So then they make an announcement. Yeah, there's something called the Eapaha. He's kind of like the town crier. So he runs around saying, "Yeah, we're having a gathering. Everybody come to the center." And so everybody goes to the center and they say, "Okay, this is Bob and his honey Joanne, and they've been together for a while, and now they're going to live together." And everybody will start hollering, ah, yoo-hoo, ha, hello, all that kind of thing, and then they go into their teepee, and that's it. That was it. Nothing. It's just an announcement that they're going to live together. See, the idea of Western marriage is created by man to to control his woman, to view his woman as his property. That's why she has his last name. That's not. We didn't have that. We didn't have that kind of concept. Yeah. And then in ancient society, sometimes something might happen in which they just can't live anymore. together because people change. And sometimes you can't live with somebody anymore. So they part. No big deal. So in ancient times, marriage was not a big thing, and neither was divorce. That was not a big thing either. And the children, they can still see their father, yeah, and he's still responsible. He's still going to love his child. They just don't live in the same teepee. That's all. But remember, they have a bunch of moms and a bunch of dads. And sometimes this happened. But they never saw it as bad because people change. This is what our ancestors knew, is that people change. So people are going to break up sometimes. So it's important that the children have structure. So even though a mom and dad may split, they still have lots of other moms and dads. And if the father is the one leaving, he's still responsible. He's going to be still be there to take care of his children, not sleeping in the same teepee anymore. That's all. And his side of the family is still going to be responsible for those children too. So the children are still loved. There is no custody battle. Yeah, there is no property battle. You know what I mean? No War of the Roses. It's just a good movie. Anyway, there was nothing like that. It was a peaceful, amicable separation. That's how it was in ancient times. But because of this experience I told you, in which Indians became Christians, now Indians think different. So now in the 1960s and so forth, if a woman is divorced, nobody wanted to touch her. Yeah, no man wanted to touch her because, ooh, she's tainted. She's a tainted woman. She's damaged goods. That's the way they would see her. And children from a second marriage were seen as bad children. So it didn't matter how many good things you did, the people will still see you as a bad kid because you're the child of a second marriage. That's what happened to me. No matter how many things that I did that were good, my mother's relatives still saw me as a piece of shit. I'm the one saving the language on my reservation, and my relatives, they still see me as a piece of shit. Unbelievable. But I don't care. I'm not saving the language for my relatives. No, I'm saving the language for my descendants. I'm doing it for the future. I don't give a shit about my relatives, to tell you the truth, because they refused to bond with me because they saw me as a piece of shit. They saw me as a bastard. When I found that out, it really, really hurt. And I really went through an anger uh, phase in my life concerning that. It's something I had to come to peace with. But this is why I never get homesick. I've been in Germany for 12 years now, 12 and a half years. And I have never, ever, ever gotten homesick. Never. I've never been back because I have no bond. Yeah? My relatives did not want to bond with me because they saw me as a bastard. So they did not allow the bonding to develop, the family bond. My relatives did not allow that to develop. I have no connection anymore. And I'm fine because I have really good friends over here, and they're more like a family to me than my own relatives. Yeah. So I'm happy. Yeah, I'm very happy with my situation. Anyway, um, so I never get homesick because I have no bond. Yeah, I have no bond to the people whatsoever. That's not my fault. That's my relative's fault. But I don't care now. Yeah, it doesn't concern me anymore. As far as I'm concerned, I belong to the world. I don't belong to Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation. I belong to the world. That's why my students are from all over the world. Yeah, so I'm in a better situation in my perspective. But on the reservation, this is the way people think. Okay? So now comes my story. Yeah, what I wanted to talk about. On Facebook, there's a relative of mine, and this relative I'm kind of close with a little bit because almost the same thing happened to him. Almost. Yeah, that when soon after he was born, his father left too. So his mother was seen as damaged goods. He's about excuse me, I think he's about 6 years younger than me. Yeah, maybe, 5, 6 years younger than me. So we used to play cars a lot when I was like maybe 10 years old. He would be like 4 or 5 years old. So we used to play a lot because we were in a very similar situation in that both of our mothers were seen as tainted goods. Yeah. So this is why we kind of have a similar background. The only difference is he was not seen as a bastard because he was a child of a first marriage. Okay, that's the only difference. But there were some things that were the same for both of us. Okay, so he wrote a statement on the Facebook that kind of kind of really put things into perspective here. That was kind of interesting. See, I'm going to say this with utmost respect to my cousin, okay? With utmost respect. But I disagree with what he said, okay? Now, this is what he said. His father died last week, okay? His father was 77 years old and he died, and I don't know what he died from, but um, suddenly he's writing these posts on Facebook about how much he loves his dad and how wonderful his dad is, how proud of his dad he is, which is all really nice. You see, he never grew up with his dad. When he was 2 years old, his father left. When you're 2 years old, you don't have a connection because you're only two. You have no memories. So I know you can love your absent parent later on in life. I know that. See, his father passed on, and the thing is, his father married a second time. Okay, and he had several more children from his second marriage. Okay, now evidently the children from the first marriage and the children from the second marriage are not close to each other. That's the information I'm gathering. Okay. Um, and what happened was that at the he went to go, to make the funeral arrangements for his father, but the his half brother, from the second marriage, wanted something different, and they clashed. They had an argument. Yeah, they had a fight. Now, let me ask you this question. Put yourself in this situation. What if you are the child of the second marriage? Okay? What if you are the oldest one of the second marriage and you grew up with your father, okay? Your father was always there in your life. Okay? You grew up with your father. You have many loving memories of your father. You know that this is his second marriage. You know that. You know that he has children from a previous marriage. But you know your father better than his first children because you have grown up with your father. Okay? Now, your father dies. Okay? Now it's time to make the funeral arrangements. You're sad because your father was always there. You grew up with your father. Who do you think should be making the funeral arrangements? You or his firstborn from the first marriage? Who do you think should be the one that should make the decision? They're called, in English they say administrator. Yeah. Who do you think should be the one that makes the funeral arrangements? The firstborn son of the first marriage, or you? You're the firstborn of the second marriage, but you grew up with the father. The oldest child from the first marriage never, never, ever grew up with the father, but you did. You grew up with the father. You have a eternal bond to your father. So who should make the funeral arrangements? It's a good question. Well, in this situation, the court said that the oldest from the first marriage, I mean, the oldest from the second marriage should be the administrator because that boy or that man, he's a man now, of course, he should be the one to make the decisions. So he made the decisions, totally pissed off the my cousin. He's the firstborn from the first marriage. So now there's this Facebook war going on, and I think the whole thing is fucked up. I think it's stupid. Really. I think it's just messed up. I think, seriously, I think they could have worked together. What went wrong is when my cousin said, I am the oldest one, I should be the one who makes the decisions. I think he was wrong because he did not grow up with his father. And the oldest boy from the second marriage, I think it's right that he is the administrator, but I still think he made a mistake. I think he could have been more respectful to the children from the first marriage, and he should have said, "Hey, let's all meet. Let's have a meeting and talk about this because we're all his children." I think that's where that guy made a mistake. Is he didn't do that. He just said, "Well, he grew up with us, so we're gonna make the announcements, yeah? And I think that's the mistake, is that if they were, really respectful, they should have said, "Yeah, okay, I am the administrator, but I want the children from the first marriage to be involved because this is their father too." Just out of respect. I think that would have been the right way to do it. Now, why didn't he see that? The oldest son of the second marriage, why didn't he see that it would be good to include the children from the first marriage? Why didn't he see that? Because he's dualistic. He's seeing things as, oh, it has to be us. It can't be them. It has to be us because we grew up with our father. So we should make the arrangements. Do you see? That's duality, separation of us against them. Yeah? When really it should have been the oldest of the second marriage. What he should have said is, yes, we are closer to our father because we grew up with him. But these others, they're his children too. So we should honor our father and include those two. And let's all meet together. We might not like each other, but let's try to remember we're doing this for our father. And let's talk about this and how are we going to do this? Let's do it for our father, for ourselves. Because see what's happening right now is both half brothers are saying, "I wanted it to do it this way," and they're both saying the same thing, and it's all me, me, me. I want it this way. That's what each one of them is saying, and they're totally forgetting the reason for the whole goddamn thing is it's because of the father, but they're refusing to see that. Instead, they're fighting amongst each other. And I think that's sad because it's disrespecting their father. It shows you that both sides don't really give a shit about their father. So I think both sides are wrong. Both sides are wrong because the focus is on who is the administrator. That's the focus, and that's wrong. The focus should be on the father. He's the one who's dead. He's the one they should honor by trying to work together. But instead, they're going to battle with each other. Turned into a court case. My God, that's not the Lakota way. You see what I mean? So look in your own life and ask yourself, you know, am I doing something like this too? See, I told you in part of my story, that my father married. He had a first wife, and he had two children from that marriage, and a boy and a girl. Yes, I have a half brother and a half sister, and I never saw myself as more important than them, and I don't think they did either. I never met my half sister in person. I met my half brother twice. Once when I was 10 years old, and another time when I was 18. Yeah. Or was it 8? I think it was 8 and 18 because I think there was a 10-year span. The first time I met him, I didn't even know. I didn't even know that was my half brother. And we were at the Rosebud Powwow, and my mother and father, they became friends. Yeah, after they divorced, they became friends. And so when we went to the powwow, my dad was visiting with my mom, and this guy came over, teenage guy. Yeah, he came over and he said, "Is this him?" So my dad said, "Yeah, that's him." He said, "Hey, how are you doing?" He said, and so I said, "Hey, little brother, how are you doing?" I said, I was scared, yeah. So I said, "Okay." And he shook my hand and nice to meet you, little brother. He said. Then he talked with my dad in Lakota for a while. Then he left. Yeah. So I asked my mom. I said, "Who's that?" And my mom said, "That's your brother." I said, "Huh?" And that's when my mom explained it to me that my dad was married before, and he had a boy and a girl. And I thought, "Wow, I have a brother." I have a big brother. That was my initial reaction, yeah. And I am in contact with my half sister through Facebook. Thanks to Facebook. Yeah, if it wasn't for Facebook, I would have never established communication. And it was her daughter, Jessie, who found my website back in 2011 to 2011. Jessie found my website and she wrote me an email and she explained to me who she was. And I thought, wow, isn't that cool? My niece wrote to me. Yeah, I didn't even know. And so I wrote back to her and we established a communication. And Jessie told me who her brothers and sisters were and her mother and about her mother and stuff like that. And I thought, oh, that's so cool. And this is all thanks to the internet. You see, the internet is not good or bad. It all depends on the person who uses it. So thanks to the internet, I met my other relatives. Yeah, and then when I got on Facebook, um, my sister connected with me, and we started talking through there. And now I learned more of what's happening with them. And I thought, wow, that is so cool. It's because of Facebook. Yeah, it's because of Facebook that we established a relation. Yeah, between brother and sister. So it's really been a good thing. And 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 so I never saw them as less than or better than or whatever. And when my father died, there was no battle. It was more like, well, what should we do? And they said, well, there's people he lived with up until he died, and they would like to make the arrangements if that's okay. And both of us, I said that's fine, and my half brother and half sister, they said that's fine too. Yeah, his funeral arrangements really should be made by those who lived with him, because in the final years of my dad's life, he was with a woman, um, and bless her soul, yeah, that my father didn't die alone, because that's a sad way to die. Yeah, that and her children really saw my father as a father. If they weren't even his kids, but they, excuse me, they really attached themselves to him, and they were devastated when my dad died. Yeah, because they were with him for 6 7 years, and they really grew close to my dad, and that really made me feel happy because my dad missed out on being a father to me and being a father to my half brother and half sister, and I really felt sorry for that because, I mean, I felt sorry for my dad because he missed out on being a parent, and I think it's important when you have children. It's that's really a beautiful job to have, and I think he really missed out on things. So when he found this new family and they grew to love him, I was happy for my dad. I wasn't jealous. I was happy. I came to peace with my dad. Yeah, because there was a point in my younger years where I was extremely angry that he chose alcohol instead of wanting to be my father. So I went through an anger period, but I dealt with that and I came to peace with it. And that's when I felt sad for him that he missed out on all these wonderful experiences. that he never really got to be a father. And I felt sad for him. And so when he met this woman, Ruby, and her children, I don't know all their names, but I do know one. Her name is JoJo, and I'm in contact with her. Uh, when my father met them, they all grew to love him, and the girls accepted him as their father. He was the only dad they ever knew, and he was really good to them. And so that made me happy. That yeah, good, that's good. So my father finally got some father experiences. The children were not his, but in his heart they were. So I'm happy for that. So when it was my father's time, I was totally okay with these children, to make all the arrangements because he was close. He was the closest thing they ever had to a father. He was more of a father to them than he was to me and my half brother and half sister. But I'm okay with that. I'm at peace with that. I'm not jealous. And neither are my half brother and half sister. They're not jealous either. My dad finally got to be a father. And I think that was a blessing because that means he appreciates me and my half sister and my half brother more than he did before. And that's a good thing. So that's why I wasn't jealous. So I was totally okay with letting this other family take charge of everything. I had no problem with it. And the girl Jojo wrote to me, and she was telling me how devastated she was. Yeah, that she still expects him to come through the door. He's a funny guy, and she learned things, Lakota things from him, and it's just like a big hole, and it can't be filled. She said, and I'm really, really, really sad. She said, and I thanked her for writing to me, and and it made me feel sad for her, but at the same time I felt happy for my dad because there were children who loved him like a father. And that made me really happy for my dad that he finally got to experience what it's like to be a father. It worked out. So I get along really good with this JoJo. She's a really nice lady. She's about the same age as me. Yeah, 26. Yeah. But you see, I came to peace with it, and I had no problem. No problem. So when my cousin got into a fight with his half brother over who should decide the funeral arrangements for their father, this shows to me that my cousin never came to peace with his father leaving his mother. That he never came to peace with that. Because if he was at peace, there would be no fight. If he were at peace with this, he would know that yes, it's okay for the children of the second marriage to make all the arrangements because they're the ones who grew up with the father. They're the ones who have more of a bond to their father. The children in the first marriage, they don't even know their dad because they were 1 and 2 years old when that marriage fell apart. So do you see what the duality on that this is an example of how Indians today are really dualistic. Now I'm going to tell you how this all happened, okay? On the reservation, I mean, back in the late 1800s.
when we were placed on reservations, they were prison camps in the beginning. And this is a situation where we couldn't leave, we were not allowed to hunt. Our knives and guns were taken from us, and we were only allowed to eat whatever the American government gave to us, which was really no good food. The quality of the food was okay when it left places like Chicago and stuff like that, but once it got to some of these train stations between there and the reservation, a lot of these handlers would sell it, and then they would buy old food and put that in there instead, and these middlemen would make a lot of money. Yeah. So what we got on the reservation was bullshit food. Yeah, it was really no good. And we ended up getting all kinds of diseases like heart diseases, hypertension, diabetes, things like that. And then at the same time, our language and ceremonies were declared illegal by the United States. So we were hit physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Soon after that, our minds became weak. And these, as I said earlier, these are the 4 parts of the self. So with the 4 parts of the self being sick, we lost our connection to our sacred center. So we started to focus on communicating away from that. And then the priests came from the various churches, and they learned our ways and said that since our ways conflict with the Bible, that our ways are evil, that they come from Satan. They come from the devil. So in our weakened states, we slowly began to accept that. Now, another thing is that there were some Lakota people that didn't want to accept that. They wanted to hang on to the traditional Lakota star knowledge ways. And if they revolted, they were sent to a mental hospital in Canton, South Dakota, which was set up for all reluctant Indians in America that did not want to become Christianized. They were sent there. And these church priests also committed the medicine men, medicine women, holy men, holy women. They committed all of them to these mental asylums too. This way, the people would not go to them for help, that they would come to the churches. They wanted the Indian people to only go to the priests and not their traditional healers. So they sent the healers to this mental asylum to die. And if you are radical, you were sent there to die too. Yeah. So while this is happening, the priests are saying to the Indian people, if you believe our way, we will help your children. And so, there was a very, very dire straits time. And so a lot of Indians became Christians because of that. Like I said, we were weak-minded too at that point. And those who stuck it out, there were people who refused to accept Christianity, but they went to church anyway. What they were doing was they were putting up a candy store front. On the outside, they were acting like good little Christian Indians, but on the inside they weren't. They were star knowledge people. Yeah? They did this because they didn't want to get sent to that mental asylum to die. That's sad, isn't it? But that's part of what happened back then. And it's because of these people who maintained this knowledge in secret. Thanks to them, they passed it down, to certain people like me, and we still have this knowledge. And I have this show, and I'm sharing it with you. Because this regards the sacred center. And we all have that. Yeah, this is not a Lakota thing. This is a Ikje Oyate thing. Ikje Oyate means human being. When you live this way, as I said in the beginning, you communicate as a human, not as a Lakota, not as a German or a Japanese or an African. You communicate as a human. Yeah? That's really important to know. So that's how it was back then. Yeah? Now remember I said that the priest said to the Indians, "We will help your children." So they took the children away from the parents, sent them to boarding school hundreds of miles away, where these children were tortured to speak only English and learn the civilized Christian way. If they spoke about home, they were tortured. These schools didn't do background checks in those days. Yeah, the pay was really low, so they got really no good teachers in these schools. A lot of these teachers were sadistic. They got sexual pleasure from torturing people. And here, this is like summer holiday camp for them. And the same thing for perverts. A lot of perverts now had their pick of the litter, and they could get away with it. That's what happened. A lot of these children were murdered, they were killed, they were raped, they were molested. And there's a lot of unmarked graves near these schools. Not all of these children are accounted for. So, those who made it through, what they learned was whatever they saw. Because a lot of these children never went back home. They were told by the priests that their families had died and that there was nobody there. And that broke their hearts. This is why some of these children, they were so sad they couldn't eat. And they ended up starving themselves to death. And those who made it through, like I said, they didn't really survive because they were not able to process all these emotional traumas that they experienced. They didn't know how, because the only adults that were around them were these unhealthy, abusive people, teachers, dorm matrons, cooks, janitors, priests. They were all unhealthy to them. That's all they knew. They learned how to become victims, and they learned how to become abusers to those who they considered weaker than themselves. So they didn't really survive. A lot of these children that made it through these schools, they had a lot of traumas that they didn't know how to deal with, because all they saw was abuse. That's what they learned. There was no adult healthy role models to emulate. And remember I said these children were told that their families were all dead. So they didn't go back during summer holiday. They just stayed at these schools and worked. So when they left these schools, they tried to live in mainstream America. Nobody accepted them. They would say, you're a heathen. You're a dirty Indian. So they couldn't even get jobs off the reservation. And when they went back to the reservation, to their people, they ran into more problems. Many, many times they were not even accepted by their own people, because their own people were saying, you're too white. You act like a white man. So they're caught in between. So a lot of them turned to alcohol to try to hide all of it, to try to forget everything. They turned to alcohol, and then later drugs. There were some who tried to make it. They married each other because they knew each other went through the same thing. And they didn't want their children to go through what they went through. So they didn't teach them the language. They didn't teach them the culture. Those children, the children of these first generation boarding school people, those children are today's elders. When they were born, they didn't learn the language. They didn't learn Lakota Star knowledge. They never got the opportunity to. When you look at an old person on the reservation today, they're not the connection to the ancient past. No, they were born in a Christian background at a time when the reservations were strongly Christian. So this is what happened. That's a native experience that a lot of people don't realize. This is what happened all over America and Canada too. So the next generation, they are sent to boarding school too. No choice. It's a little bit better, but they're still abused. They're still getting treated really no good. And so they grow up, have children, and they don't teach their children anything. What can they teach them? They don't know anything concerning their own language. This is why today most people cannot speak their own language, and what little cultural information they know is Christianized, meaning it's dualistic, and it's not the original ancient form. Okay, so the first generation of Indian kids that were sent to boarding school, since all around them were unhealthy adults who did nothing but abuse them, they didn't receive healthy parenting. They missed things that they should have learned about life. So they're lacking emotional development. So when they grow up, and those who make it through these boarding schools and then they have children, those children are also lacking that emotional support, that emotional development, because the parents don't know how to do it. Yeah, all they knew and all they learned was abuse. All they experienced in these schools was abuse. So they have a hard time trying to be a healthy parent. So they do the best that they can. But the children still are not receiving the proper emotional development, the experiences that healthy children should receive from healthy parents. They're still missing that. And so when that second generation grows up, they know even less concerning healthy parenting. And so their children receive even less. And every time this happens, the next generation becomes more dualistic than the previous one. So let me try to say that again. The first generation boarding school kids, they didn't receive proper parenting skills. So when they have children, their children are not receiving healthy training that they should be receiving. They're receiving even less than their parents. Now that second generation, when they grow up, see, they know even less. So when they have children, those children are receiving even less, and it gets worse with each generation, which also means that the less healthy emotional development they receive, the more dualistic they become. So with each generation is more becoming emotionally underdeveloped, they're also becoming more dualistic. So today, it's a huge mess on the reservation. We're incredibly, as a whole, We're incredibly underdeveloped emotionally, and we are incredibly dualistic. We're quick to attack each other. We're quick to pull each other down. We're just like the rest of the civilized, dualistic world. Notice I didn't say white man, because this is all over the world. It's not just among white countries. It's all over the world. Wherever there is a dualistic ideology, where one gender is considered less than and property of the other gender, you're going to have incredibly underdeveloped emotional people, which equals incredibly dualistic people. And that is unhealthy. So that started by the time of the late 1800s on the reservation.